It's time for Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
Let's in Christian love. This is Wretched Radio. Round 3, baby. Ding the bell. We are going to engage again, not because the subject hasn't been covered, but because there are so many tangentiary. I think I just made up a word.
Tangential.
That's that too. But see, I think there's words that are changing. Okay, I used to think it was ingratitude. Now it's ungratefulness. What did that come from? Somebody who decides what words are correct? I'll tell you the answer. I do. So these are some tangentiary issues to the subject of masking in America. A subject that we tried to cover probably a couple of weeks ago, dealing with 1 Peter 2, Romans 13. It was my position that unless the government tells us to sin, a la Acts chapter 5, we obey even when we don't like it. Well, lots of people, okay, pretty much everybody who sent an email, disagreed with me, and yet bringing up so many subjects for us to consider. This is a way for us to sharpen our Christian worldview as we look at the complexities of these issues. And so it is, I have your emails with a lot of issues that people are dealing with in different parts of the country because of masks and churches. I think now in California, churches they're being told by the government, you can't worship inside, you got to do it outside. I think I saw a picture of Grace Community Church. They've got one of those big circus tents, built up so that people can worship outside. And people are going with what? We've got to obey this? When does it become something where we Acts chapter 5 this? These are difficult questions, and different Christians are coming up with different answers. So let me be the definitive source of everything that is correct. I'm sorry. That's what I'm supposed to be. But
you're a talk show host.
Does one person have this nailed? So let's work through some of the issues in an effort not to get annoyed with one another. I mean, we don't have to talk about this for me to annoy you. Let's talk about these things to try to figure them out biblically. Perhaps the biggest one that I heard from people responding to my position on the mask business was that the law of the land, the supreme authority in our country, is not the president, Congress, your governor, mayor, etc. It's the Constitution. Therefore, if a politician is mandating something that I do not believe is constitutional, I'm actually sinning if I obey it. Therefore, in order to not sin and participate in this government's sin, I actually need to disobey it. Now, if you think that that's just, well, I don't know who could think such a thing. Apparently, if my email is any indication, a lot of people do. Is that statement correct, that the Constitution is the highest authority in our land? And I'm not sure that this would be one of those questions that if I were before a Senate Judiciary Committee and they said yes or no, I wouldn't answer it. Because the Constitution is the document that guides and protects the rights of citizens and really puts the leash on government. It's far less about how the people are supposed to behave and how the government is supposed to behave. It is the document that enumerates powers. But does that mean that it is the authority? See, I think that word gets us into a little bit of trouble because the reality is a piece of paper isn't my authority. I don't want to make this comparison because I think it's got too many holes, but I'm going to apparently anyway. The Bible, this book of pages, well, that's not my authority per se. It's what it tells me I can do and what I can't do. And this particular book, it gives authority to people who have authority over me. So God, for starters, pastor, parents, teacher, government. The Constitution, it puts the guardrails on the government's authority, but I don't think that it's quite accurate to say the Constitution itself is the authority. People are the ones that are acting. Now, this is going to sound a little bit silly, and I'm not trying to be trite with this, but I think it's still fair. You're driving down the freeway, and you're doing 85 on Highway 85.
Because I can't do 55.
You can't do it. You are Sammy Hagar. You can't drive 55. And you get pulled over, and the officer says, Mr. Hagar, get a haircut. And you say, well, that's not a part of your authority. But let's get back to the issue at hand. The officer says you were doing, I clocked you at 85, you're 30 over the limit, and you say, doesn't matter, sir. The Constitution is my authority, not you. And, furthermore, I don't believe that the Constitution allows you to contain my speed to a certain level. I do not believe you are behaving constitutionally. Therefore, you have no authority over me because the Constitution is my authority. Now, I know it's not perfect, but I don't think it's entirely ridiculous. And I think once you get up from being tased for saying such a thing, and they cut your hair, because Sammy needs one, you will have lost the battle because the Constitution, it does give authority to people. Now, the question is, what if I believe those people aren't doing it right? Because that really is the issue at hand. You don't believe that the powers enumerated to these people include mandating masks or, in this instance, the speed limit of 55. What does that document do? It allows for a checks and balance system so that if somebody is not applying the Constitution correctly, that person can be corrected. How? Well, they can be brought to trial for crimes, misdemeanors. That person can be impeached, and that person most certainly can be voted out. If you and I all go about the business of determining when I believe the Constitution is being abused by a civil authority, number one, you got anarchy. Total chaos. That you would say, I'm sorry, officer, I don't believe that you have the authority to pull me over. Or I don't believe that the government has the authority to fill in the blank when it comes to running a business. Or when it comes to any sort of social interaction. There's just going to be absolute chaos. Who decides? Do we see in the Constitution anything that says, well, if enough people get annoyed about a situation, then they can overthrow the government or they cannot obey the authorities? It doesn't say that. We have courts for those things. We have polling booths. We have elections for those things, not an individual's ability to say, no, I'm not going to because I don't believe you as the elected official actually have the authority over me. The Constitution does. You're not in alignment, in my opinion, with the Constitution. Therefore, I can opt out of the system and not obey. That was a big argument that was presented to me. And for the aforementioned reasons, I would like to suggest to you, while I get that, and while many people that sent me emails were very smart and very clever, I think that it's a cleverness that the text just doesn't allow for. We need to remember, because I did hear a little hint of this. You know, when the Bible was written, they didn't have a representative republic. True, but I trust you would agree with me that certainly the Holy Spirit, God, was aware that in the 21st century there would be a representative republic, and that these words in 1 Peter 2 and Romans 13 would have to apply to our context too, correct? So when we say, well, in the first century, when Peter and Paul were writing this, they just had an emperor and a ruler, and that was the situation. You're just told to obey. But now we have the ability to disobey. Hold it. We don't actually have the ability to disobey. We're told to obey, and the government tells us to obey, and the Constitution tells us to obey. And when it is being applied wrongly, it applies for mechanisms for us to change that. And we are to avail ourselves of those things, and we can. We can question our authorities. It's okay. And by the way, apparently somebody, I guess, took a video from a number of years ago. We were at Clemson, and we were interviewing kids, students, and the police stopped us. And I engaged the police officer and said, "Can you please tell me what law I'm violating? Otherwise, I don't think you're doing this correctly." And people said, "But you want to impose the mask thing. Aha." Well, first of all, I stopped. I did what I was told by the officer. Second of all, I never said that you can't engage the government in question. We have town forums, town hall meetings. You can do that you can blog all you want to, respectfully disagree and dissent. But that's radically different than disobeying and saying that person doesn't have authority over me because the Constitution, a piece of paper, supersedes their authority. Yikes. I think it, while clever, is simply not permitted in the text, and practically the anarchy that would ensue just makes that, I think, a misunderstanding of how we should view the Constitution. This is Wretched Radio.
Hey,
Todd.
sweet.
Take her around the block a few times?
Who's a good girl? You're not, because nobody does good. No, not one. Romans 5 says we're born in sin and iniquity, and our hearts are deceitful and wicked. You know that if you'd use the law which brings about the knowledge of sin.